Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 13th of February 2023, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me by video link, we've got David Scott, Mark Anderson, and a special guest, Bruce Scott, will be on shortly. But let's get straight on here with the biggest news. This is the top story on the BBC website this morning. Mystery surrounds objects shot down by US military. And this seems to be a theme right across the mainstream press. Nobody really knows what kind of objects are being shot down by the US military at the moment. We'll come on to the details of it in a second. But this is really, although the BBC didn't mention UFOs specifically, the Daily Mail certainly did. And here's their headline for today. So it's been happening for years. Mark Rubio says UFOs have routinely operated over restricted US airspace, but America has no idea what they are or where they come from, as Pentagon refuses to rule out 3 objects shot down over the weekend are aliens. David, I want to get your thoughts on this first of all. Are we really in the world where the mainstream press is running this type of conspiracy theory?
And it's not even August. I thought this was reserved for August, but no, apparently not. Apparently we're running these at all 12 months of the year. What they're trying to suggest is somewhere on Earth there's a little alien sitting looking very unhappy, and he's writing to himself, he's writing, "Dear Diary, came to Earth for a short mini break. It didn't go well. The Americans mistook me for a Chinese weather balloon and shot me down." That seems to be the BBC's take on things, and well, words fail me, Mike.
Well, words fail me as well. So let's just look at what's actually been going on. If we bring this one on screen, if we could, Stephanie, please. So US shoots down unknown object the size of a small car after it entered airspace near Alaska. This was the headlines over the weekend. It was all over the BBC and so on. So they shot down this unknown flying object off the coastline of Alaska just days after it downed a Chinese spy balloon, is what the text says. It was shot down on the orders of President Biden. It was flying at an altitude of 40,000 feet, and so it was considered a threat to civilian airspace and so on. So let's just have a brief look at the briefing from the Pentagon.
So first of all, to add to information already provided earlier by the White House, at the direction of the President of the United States, fighter aircraft assigned to U.S. Northern Command successfully took down a high-altitude airborne object off the northern coast of Alaska at 1:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today, within U.S. sovereign airspace over U.S. territorial water. On February 9, North American Aerospace Defense Command detected an object on ground radar and further investigated and identified the object using fighter aircraft. The object was flying at an altitude of 40,000 feet and posed a reasonable threat to the safety of civilian flight. U.S. Northern Command is beginning recovery operations now.
So that was then followed up with another one which headed into Canadian airspace and so on. But sticking with the Alaska story for a second, this headline in Newsweek: Alaska governor fears airspace intrusions may be the new norm. And this is Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy saying, unlike other states, Alaska is truly on the front lines because of our close proximity to our neighbors. There's very little margin for error. Russian territory is only a few miles away. We are the one state closest to the Korean Peninsula and China. Alaska is truly on the front lines, and not to be outdone. Then Lisa Murkowski pushes zero tolerance for threats for Alaskan space. So she's Alaska's senator. And she's saying basically, you know, this is sovereign airspace. We can't have our sovereign integrity. Very much similar language to sort of Ukrainian situation and so on. This was the Chinese response, just for the record. The China side has repeatedly shared information and stated its position on the unintended entry of the unmanned Chinese civilian airship into US airspace due to force majeure. The US Congress's resolution is purely about scoring political points and dramatizing the whole thing. China deplores it and firmly opposes it. And this was because the US Congress had passed a resolution criticizing China for their surveillance tactics in the United States. But look, this statement also came out from the Pentagon over the weekend, at least from North American Aerospace Defense Command. Let's just zoom in on that a little bit. It says, with the cooperation of Federal Aviation Administration, North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, implemented a temporary flight restriction airspace in central Montana on the 11th of February 2023 to ensure the safety of air traffic in the area during NORAD operations. The restriction has been lifted. NORAD detected a radar anomaly and sent fighter aircraft to investigate. Those aircraft did not identify any object to correlate to the radar hits. NORAD will continue to monitor the situation. So now not only do we have the mainstream press seriously talking about space aliens, but we have NORAD having some kind of anomaly on the radar, scrambling jets on a regular basis. And of course, that will generate headlines as well. David, I just want to get your thoughts on this situation. Then I've got to ask Mark for comment as well.
Well, firstly, right, Alaska's on the front lines. So this is a drumbeat. It's all urgent. It's all stressed. We're on the front lines. The front line of what? Occasional weather balloons blowing over. Right? I mean, it's very, very strange to be hiking up this level of fear and anxiety over, it would appear, something that's utterly trivial. Now, the second thing is, for those of us who have looked into the events surrounding 9/11, the prompt response of fighter jets to radar anomalies is very encouraging, because it didn't happen then. And the whole unknown nature of what they shot down also is a bit puzzling, because surely fighter pilots have eyeballs and have some idea before they shoot something down what it is. I mean, that would be normal procedure, wouldn't it? You would fly alongside and have a little look to make sure it wasn't, something you don't want to be shooting down. So this all seems to be extremely strange.
Yes, Mark, have you got any thoughts?
Not a whole lot. This one's not my bailiwick lately, but David stole my thunder just a tad there. I was going to say essentially the same thing, that you would identify something before you would shoot it down. I don't know if they'll eventually try and blame some of this on Russia coming across the Bering Straits there. Maybe they're setting us up for that. In conspiracy lore, there's been people predicting for years that some agency of the government will act like there's going to be an alien invasion to galvanize the populace, to unify people behind a common threat. I'm sure that that's not what this is, but it bears at least a mention. We'll just have to see how this unfolds to see if that's not what it is. Some sort of ever expanding specter of a so-called alien presence or alien invasion for some sort of propaganda or population control purposes. That's a far out assumption right now, but it bears mention because that's been floating around the internet for years.
Well, indeed. Okay, let's come back to the UK then. David, who are the terrorists?
Well, this is the question. It seems to be an ever-expanding group of people. So here we have the Morning Star reporting, Home Office challenged to crack down on far-right extremism following a fascist protest, and never short at calling people fascist, Morning Star, outside an asylum seeker hotel. They report a fascist protest outside an asylum seeker hotel in Scotland to spark calls for the Home Secretary to crack down on far-right extremism. Scottish Green MSP Maggie Chapman has written a letter, to Suella Braverman to express her concern at the demo organised by white nationalist group Patriotic Alternative in the Renfrewshire town of Erskine. So here we have Maggie Chapman, MSP's tweet. She said, I've written to the Home Secretary regarding the threat posed by domestic extremism. The racist and fascist rally, so we're using the normal buzzwords, slurs, in Erskine on Sunday was disgusting. Disgusting's also an interesting word. They always feel disgust. That's what Hitler felt about the Jews. I just point that out in the passing. But I was heartened by those who stood up in solidarity with asylum seekers and against racism. This is the Scotland we want. So we're doing manipulation of the politics surrounding the huge influx of people into the country under the cover of asylum seeking. Now, here we have the actual letter she sent to Cyril Braverman. It starts, "I am writing to you." Right? You'd always tell someone who's not very clever because they start letters by saying, "I am writing," the one thing that's obvious. She said, "I'm writing to you regarding the current assessment of domestic terror threats in Scotland and across the UK." And she goes on to talk about far-right activists linked to banned neo-Nazi groups attended a rally organised by Patriotic Alternative in Erskine. The rally took place next to a hotel accommodation that's been provided for asylum seekers, and attendees claiming, despite substantial opposition, that the asylum seekers were not welcome in the local community. So it's all about this protest, and as you're aware, there was a protest that was turned violent in Liverpool surrounding asylum seekers being housed in the local community, and there's been several protests in the Republic of Ireland. So this is something that's generally getting pushback from local communities. It gets wider, however. So we have another MSP. So this is the Herald reporting. SNP MP urges Home Office to widen the focus of the terror strategy. So this is Kirsten Oswald. She said the PREVENT programme was too preoccupied with the possible Islamist threat and risk stigmatising and marginalising Muslim communities. She wants the programme to take in anti-vaxxers, incels and followers of Trump supporting QAnon's conspiracy theory. So we're talking about defining people who are opposed, because anti-vaxxer means someone who's opposed to compulsory vaccine mandates. So someone who's taking an entirely peaceful, entirely rational response, standing against government policy, this MP wants to be designated a terrorist and wants the PREVENT strategy to come and start to impact upon them. So I thought, wait a minute, I recognise that face. Kirsten Oswald, where have I seen her recently? Oh, well, actually, she was at a protest in Glasgow, a protest in favour of trans rights. And here she's pictured standing in front of a sign that says, "Decapitate TERFs." TERFs being people like Posey Parker, stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminists. And just in case anyone thinks that this is some sort of metaphor, there's a little drawing of a guillotine there next to it, just to be clear. Now, this particular MP did come out and say that she hadn't noticed the sign she was standing in front and she was appalled by it. So she did come out later and say this did not represent her views, but there was lots of photographs of her standing with violent signs in a crowd that clearly were very radical and advocated violence against political opponents. I would have thought that would be closer to terrorism, but there we go. Going back to Maggie Chapman, here we see Maggie Chapman here standing up with, speaking with, and standing next to and getting photographs taken with trans activist, a fine young man called Beth Douglas. Now, Beth Douglas then had to be suspended from the Scottish Green Party, of which she was a member, because of the violent, the information he was putting out, tweets he was putting out with advocating violence. So here we see one with him holding an axe and holding a knife. He says, "I heard you all hate trans women, knives and axes, love from Glasgow." This was to intimidate Posey Parker and the 1,000 women who came out to listen to what was being said in George Square. So this is a bit worrying. And here's another one from Beth. If you insist on the Trans Day of Visibility, and we're going to beat you up for it. So open advocacy of violence. All these people who are saying that their political opponents are literally terrorists and must be acted on by the state and controlled by the state and presumably tried and imprisoned by the state for what they believe, those same people are advocating or are very closely associated with those who are advocating political violence. This seems strange. Is it an example of the iron law of woke projection? They always accuse you of the thing that they are themselves guilty of.